The morning was ordinary, or so it seemed. The kind of morning where the streets buzzed with routine, where commuters clutched their coffees like lifelines, and where nobody really noticed anyone else. But inside a small corner cafe on the edge of downtown, an extraordinary story was about to unfold. The bell above the glass door jingled, and a tall man in a simple jacket and baseball cap walked in. To the rest of the world, he looked like just another customer, slightly tired eyes, a modest smile, the sort of man who didn't draw attention. But that was the point. He was not just another customer. He was Richard Sterling, the CEO of a billion-dollar restaurant empire. Today, though, he wasn't a CEO. He wasn't chauffeured, suited, or announced. Today, he was undercover. Richard had decided weeks ago to experience life on the other side of the counter, to walk into one of his own cafes disguised as an ordinary guest. He wanted to know what his employees truly felt, when no one was watching, when they didn't know the boss was listening. So there he was, sitting quietly at a booth in the corner, pretending to scroll through his phone while stealing glances at the staff. And that's when he noticed him. The waiter. Young, maybe mid-20s. His apron was worn, shoes scuffed, but there was a brightness about him that didn't quite match the tired circles under his eyes. He moved fast, balancing trays, refilling cups, remembering orders without writing them down. And though the cafe was buzzing, he greeted every customer with the same sincerity. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. When the waiter approached, Richard spoke in a deliberately low, unremarkable tone. "Coffee, please. Black. No sugar." The waiter nodded, jotting nothing down. "Coming right up, sir." Richard expected that to be the end of it. Just a transaction, one more moment in a sea of anonymity. But when the coffee arrived, the waiter lingered. And then he said something. Just a few words. Words that pierced the air like cold steel. "Sir, you remind me of my dad. He used to sit in that exact booth before he lost his job." Richard froze. The ceramic cup trembled slightly as he set it down. "Your dad?" he asked carefully, playing along, though inside his heart gave an uneasy twist. The young man nodded, his voice soft. "Yeah, he worked for a restaurant chain. Gave everything to it. Then, one day, they let him go. Just like that. Said he was replaceable. He never really recovered after that." Richard's throat tightened. He suddenly felt the disguise burning on his face, the weight of his secret pressing against his chest. Which company?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The waiter chuckled bitterly. "Sterling Foods. You've probably heard of them. The CEO, Richard Sterling. He's got more money than he could ever spend. Meanwhile, my dad lost our home. I had to drop out of college to keep food on the table." The name hit like a punch. Richard's own name, spoken with quiet pain, spat out like a curse. He forced himself to keep his expression neutral. His mind raced. He wanted to explain, to defend himself, to say, "It wasn't me. It was the system, the board, the economy." But what good were excuses when the consequences sat right in front of him, in the eyes of a son forced to carry burdens no young man should carry? The waiter shrugged, almost apologetically. "Sorry, I didn't mean to unload that on you. You just reminded me." He used to sip black coffee and stare out the window, like he was trying to figure out how to fix everything. Richard couldn't speak. He only nodded, feeling the sting of guilt settle deeper. The conversation could have ended there, but fate had other plans. That afternoon, the cafe grew busier. A rush of customers filled the small space, voices overlapping, orders piling high. Richard sat quietly, observing. And that's when it happened. An older woman shuffled in, thin, frail, with trembling hands clutching a worn purse. She struggled to reach the counter, nearly dropping her coins as she whispered an order for tea. Richard noticed the sighs from customers behind her, the impatience, the mutters. But the waiter didn't rush her. He leaned down gently, his voice warm. "Take your time, ma'am. Don't worry." When she fumbled again, he slipped his own wallet from his apron pocket, sliding a bill across without hesitation. "This one's on me today. Just enjoy your tea." The woman's eyes brimmed with tears. She touched his hand briefly, whispering gratitude before shuffling to a seat. Richard swallowed hard. He had seen many employees in his life, thousands, across hundreds of locations. But how many had he really seen? How many stories had he overlooked? How many sacrifices like this had gone unnoticed? And then came the breaking point. As the rush died down, Richard overheard two coworkers whispering near the counter. They spoke about the waiter. Can you believe he still comes to work every day after pulling double shifts at the hospital at night, taking care of his dad? Richard's head snapped up. His dad. The man he had just described earlier. The one who had lost everything. And now his son, the young waiter, was carrying it all. Working endless hours in the cafe, then cleaning hospital floors overnight, just to pay bills and keep his father alive. Richard felt the room tilt. His disguise suddenly felt like a betrayal, a cruel game. This wasn't just undercover observation anymore. This was personal. The days stretched on, and Richard stayed longer than he planned, lost in thought. When he finally stood to leave, the waiter approached with the same tired but genuine smile. Thank you for coming in today, sir. Hope the coffee was good. Richard hesitated. His throat tightened again. It was more than good, he managed, and so was the service. The young man laughed lightly. Well, I try. One cup at a time, right? Richard wanted to say something, anything. To reveal who he was. To promise change. But the words stuck, because he knew promises were easy. Action was harder. And until he figured out what action looked like, silence was the only thing he could give. So he nodded and walked out. But he didn't walk away. That night, back in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city skyline, Richard didn't sleep. The waiter's words replayed endlessly. He used to sit in that exact booth before he lost his job. Sterling Foods. My dad lost everything. I dropped out of college to keep food on the table. For the first time in years, Richard felt small in his own empire. He thought of every boardroom meeting where numbers had mattered more than names. Every graph that climbed higher while families like this one sank lower. And he made a decision. The next morning, long before dawn, Richard returned to that same cafe. Not as a customer this time, but as the boss. When the young waiter arrived, bleary-eyed from another hospital shift, he nearly dropped his apron. Wait. You. What are you? Richard held up a hand, his eyes steady. I owe you more than an explanation. I owe you a chance. The cafe fell silent. Other employees looked on, stunned. But Richard wasn't playing a role anymore. He was a man who had been reminded of his humanity by someone who had every reason to hate him. And yet still chose kindness, still bought tea for a stranger, still worked himself to the bone for love of his father. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. The CEO was no longer just undercover. He was exposed, not by disguise, but by truth. And it all began with a cup of coffee, and the words that had left him frozen cold.